Welcome to the 104th National Communication Association Convention. I want to say that we meet today in the spirit of play. And for me, seeing the program and seeing how the theme has evolved and been twisted and turned and shaved and all kinds of different things happened, I gave birth to it, I sent it out with hope, and now I am amazed at the result. So I hope that you all enjoy the convention, have some fun, and take a moment to think about this question. I had this question in mind when I created this theme. What does a scholarly association and its activities mean for new generations? Because I think we need to focus some attention on that question. If we are to survive and thrive through our next period as a national association, I think we need to be paying attention to our young scholars, the people who are just entering the field, and the people that I saw this morning at the newcomers reception. They are wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, and our future rests on them. So this theme was an effort to tap into some of that creativity, to tap into some of that wonderful make things happening and enjoying them along the way spirit that we have here in this community. We are living in interesting times, a time that has highlighted some of the cruel paradoxes of democracy, that has questioned the values of some of our most long-standing and cherished institutions, and that has increased the divisiveness that separates us as a people and as citizens of this country. So we come to a great question. What makes a nation great? And what does history have to say about that rather compelling question? So today I want to introduce to you in a moment our panelists, and here's how we're going to move forward. I'm going to ask them each an opening question. They'll have a short period of time to answer, and then we will engage in conversation, not presentations, but conversation about some of the key questions that underlie that issue of the great nation. And then finally, in the end, there's microphones at either edge here, and we will reserve some time for questions from the audience. So if you ever wanted to ask Abraham Lincoln or Marshall McLuhan or Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Sojourner Truth a compelling question, start thinking now, because your turn will come. I'd like to introduce our panelists and take note of some changes. Representing Abraham Lincoln, we have David Zarefsky, Professor Emeritus of Communication Studies, Northwestern University. Presenting Marshall McLuhan, Tom Gencarelli, Professor and Chair of Communication, Manhattan College. Brand new to this program, with only 2 weeks of notice to prepare, I would like to welcome with a special thanks our Sojourner Truth, Celnisha Dangerfield from Marietta Technical College. And finally tonight, Elizabeth Cady Stanton is presented by Paula McKenzie, Associate Professor of Speech Communication and Theater Arts at Bethune-Cookman University. Protagoras, with some regrets, is unable to attend. I know, he said on email, something funny happened on the way to the forum. And he sends his apologies that he's unable to attend. But we will have a lively discussion. And so I pose my first question to each of you, which is, who are you And has history treated you fairly? I'll throw it open.
Then I'll step up. Some people knew me as Isabella Van Wagener, but I prefer to be called Sojourner Truth. And if you ask me if history has been fair to me, I must say that there's some good that has come with history for me and some bad, just as life has had some good and some bad. Born into the institution of slavery, I represent a group of people who have not always been valued, and yet I have a seat at the table, literally and figuratively. There are other women who dared to do things far less outstanding as stand in front of crowds of people and express their opinions, and for that, their lives were taken. So has history been fair in that regard? Probably more fair to me than it has been to others. But at the same time, everything you know about me has been told to you by other people. I have not had very much say in my story. And there are times when people have adjusted the story for their own personal benefit. Ain't I a woman? Well, my first language was Dutch, and I grew up in New York, so I think that makes me bilingual. Has history been fair? I represent people of color, I represent women. I have been judged by my social status, and for all of those reasons, I should be muted and nameless, and yet I have a seat at the table. And yet there are those who only see me as a former slave, a Libyan Sibyl, an entertainer, or a troublemaker, whereas there are others that know me as a social justice icon, a traveling preacher, a powerhouse rhetorician who used the public sphere for liberation and as a space for agency. Has history been fair? Well, they can't decide if they want to put me on your currency, so I'll allow you to decide whether or not history has been fair.
I am Abraham Lincoln, Mr. Chairman. No one not in my situation can appreciate the significance of this moment. To this place and the kindness of these people, I owe everything. Here I have lived for half a century and have passed from a young to an old man. And I have discovered that historians have ranked me as the greatest of all the presidents of the United States. Who would have guessed? And I feel fairly confident that I will not be trumped in that regard by your current president. He says he's of the same party as I am, but I cannot recognize that. Meanwhile, I've learned that I have been the subject of 16,000 books, more than anyone except for Jesus. Some of them are a bit strange. One has me walking around in cemeteries talking to the dead. Another has me hunting vampires. But no one is picturing me as a baboon or an ape the way they used to when I was here before. Why, if you go to Springfield, you'll see a room full of those cartoons all over. History has been kind to me. I've even learned in my short return visit that in your association, I have a doppelganger who goes by the name of David something or other, who's going around reading all those speeches that I made when I was campaigning against Judge Douglas. I never thought they would still be read. So yes, it's been very kind to me.
If I may, I would like to introduce myself as the mother of the women's movement. That's what Elizabeth Cady Stanton stands for today. I think I'm too loud. I hear an echo. What happened?
It's that new technology.
It's that new technology. It is. It's too loud. And I have such a small voice. I'll make it smaller. Hello? That's too small. Well, as the mother of the women's movement, I'm most disappointed as I return upon your kind invitation to see where women are today. I understand it was 52% of women that voted for that man you referenced. Trump.
Is that right?
Yes. I find that most appalling. I was the one that first said, give women the vote. And they laughed and cajoled and said no. But I understand after 72 years of a long fight, women did get the vote. You didn't get to vote, did you, dear?
I can now.
Oh. Are we going to be here that long? Are you going to let us stay?
You're all welcome to stay.
Well, but we could do something, couldn't we? We could really do something, don't you think? We could come together and make a plan. Because that's what I did. You see, I really believed that I had a good mind. And my father shared his law books with me. And I had the opportunity, because I did come from a privileged background, that I had access to things that men could do and I couldn't. You had a voice. I was denied my voice. So of course I had to speak up. I was born in 1815, November 12th, 1815. You just celebrated my 200-year anniversary of my birth. This is 18, so 3 years ago. Am I aging that badly? Is it 200 years? Oh my. Well, I find having the opportunity to be revived again is always much appreciated, because I think women have a great deal to say, and I hope that, oh, I see women in the audience. Do they get to speak too? There have been so many changes since my time. We weren't allowed to keep our own money if we worked. Of course, I didn't get to. But if we were divorced, we didn't get to keep our children. Do they get to keep their children today?
Mostly.
Oh, I remember. I did my homework. I read. That's why I know about this man that's in the office right now. He's most depressing to me. I believed in democracy. We still have that, don't we?
Sort of.
Oh, I don't know. This man that's in the White House right now really frightens me. So I thank you for having the opportunity to come back and speak to this. Thank you.
And so I represent Canada on the panel this evening. And I thank you at your American National Communication Association conference for inviting me to participate. I began my scholarly life studying the trivium, and along the way, from the background in rhetoric, found myself interested in writing about the popular culture in my first book, which is called The Mechanical Bride, which is about advertising, and went on from that work to become a scholar specifically of media, which is something I'll talk about as I address the question of has history been good to me or not? It was Wired magazine and its readers around the turn of the century who declared me their patron saint. And to invoke a certain movie in which I had a cameo role, I would say that they know nothing of my work. With respect to this National Communication Association, I would invoke Camille Paglia, whose work I respect, and say, as she did, I am an excellent scholar, but I am not such a good academic. And with respect to my scholarship, like Joyce took the modern turn into the novel, and I did study Joyce and write about him, I would say that I took a bit of a modern turn with respect to how we approach scholarship, and that there is a great extent to which my work has not been appreciated for that reason. Interestingly enough, it was about that time, shortly after you Americans dropped the atomic bomb, that we entered into the postmodern age, and looking back, I guess my work is sort of postmodern in that regard. But with respect to my reputation in a place like this, I think that I wrote with my son Eric about the idea of figure and ground. Eric, unfortunately, some of you may know, passed away in Bogota, Colombia, back this past spring, as he was invited down to speak at the launching of a new PhD program. But when we talk about figure ground and we talk about my reputation, I think the question becomes, what is the figure and what is the ground in terms of the extent to which my work is appreciated and to which it is not? History, though, has been good to me in terms of fame. I would invoke T.S. Eliot, who said, "Ours is only in the trying, the rest is not our business." And I think that a great number of scholars seek with their work to become famous rather than to do the work, seek to do something like what happened to me, which is nothing I ever intended. And in that regard, I do think that history treated me well and that I am here. And Star, you invited me, and I thank you for that, and I wish you the best of luck with this conference.
I remembered reading about him. Now he's the medium is the message, right? Mm-hmm. Medium is the message. That's what.
That
You'll
would
talk
be me.
about that, I think. Okay. Yes.
I will.
Medium is the message. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much. So please, have some grapes or some cheese or chocolates, and let's get started on our conversation. So democracy has long struggled with the ability of some speakers to fan popular desires and prejudices rather than focusing on more rational argument and reasoned discourse. Some of our democratic structures have in fact focused on this very difficult dilemma. How do we ensure power for the voice of the people and yet also protect from the rhetorical excesses of charismatic leaders using inflamed rhetoric? What lessons come from your time about this contradiction that seems to lie at the heart of democracy?
If I may, I wrote down some definitions. We're talking about demagoguery, right? So I'd like to share a definition first. A leader who's, I can't read my writing. A leader who makes use of popular prejudices and false claims and promises in order to gain power. That sounds like that man that's in the White House right now. And there was another piece that said, when the term was first used in 1648, and when the ancient Greeks used demagogus, from demos, meaning people, they meant someone good, a leader who used outstanding material, great rhetorical skills to further the interest of the common people. So they thought it was a good thing. But by 1716, the word took on a negative meaning, suggesting that one who uses powers of persuasion to sway and mislead. That made me think of the men today in the White House. But then I read a definition today. I think you told me yours. This is the same one we read together, and it said, the word means, quote, a leader who makes use of popular prejudices and false claims and promises in order to gain power. So that should just say that man's name, don't you think? Trump in the dictionary, wouldn't that work?
And so what lessons? Is it, I'm sorry, Ms. Stanton or Mrs. Stanton? So what lessons have you learned from your struggles on the women's movement about demagoguery and democracy?
Well, we only told the truth, of course. But there were those of the time that took issue with what we said, and they thought we were crazy. I had been told that I had a good mind and that I could do things. However, I also learned when my father let me read his law books in his law library. But otherwise, when I turned 16, the world changed. They wanted me to be different. They wanted me to do exactly what they told me to do. I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. When I met Henry Stanton, I fell in love. We had a whirlwind romance from 1839. By 1840, we were married, and we went to London for our honeymoon. And we were attending the Worldwide Anti-Slavery Conference. Did you do that for your honeymoon by any chance? We were very, very committed to abolition. We wanted to stop slavery. And we just learned to speak the truth. So I think that's what people need to learn today. The lessons that we would offer today is try to speak the truth.
You know, this is not a new question. I spoke on it in Ottawa, Illinois in 1858. I said, in this and like communities, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. So he who molds public sentiment is greater than he who makes laws or enacts decisions. He makes it possible for the laws or the decisions to be enacted. But the problem is that he who molds public sentiment does not always mold it for good. I warned about that too as a young man. I said that when people's attachment to the law diminishes, a towering genius will arise, and they will follow the towering genius, and that will be the end of democracy. Now, I had Judge Douglas in mind because he was a molder of public sentiment, but he did not tell the truth. And he did not show moral courage. He said he didn't care whether slavery was voted down or voted up. And that's where we went astray.
When I worked at the University of Toronto, I lived down the street from a fellow named Anatole Rappaport, who worked with Alfred Korzybski, who founded the Institute of General Semantics. And Korzybski talked about our propensity to either-or thinking. And as a Canadian looking across the border, I've noted that you have had a two-party system, which on our side of the border, we of course have a parliamentary system. Democracy can be a messy thing, and of course it can be messier in a parliamentary system. But what I have seen happen in the two-party system in the United States is a polarizing. A polarizing which President Lincoln could lead to another civil war. It certainly seems to be doing so at this point in time.
But we didn't always have a two-party system. Why, in my day, the parties were all in flux. There were Whigs and anti-Nebraska Democrats and pro-Nebraska Democrats and know-nothings and people who weren't quite sure where they stood. And that was when there was a chance to really make some progress. But Douglas, Judge Douglas, is the one who cast that all aside, all because he wanted to see a railroad built from Chicago to the West Coast.
And then we entered an electronic media age, where the cost of advertising on television weighs heavily on the process and leaves secondary, tertiary level parties out of the battle between the two.
What is television?
I'm sorry. We're living in two worlds, two times.
So we have a two-party system, though. I mean, it seems like you're sort of condemning us to this either-or thinking model, and I'm not completely sure that there's any way open there. Is there any hope in that sense of the party system within the country?
I don't wish to be misunderstood, and I don't mean to monopolize the conversation. I'm not condemning your system. I think we see people condemning themselves to taking sides based upon sides. I think that many in the audience might agree with me that the culture of the United States is an anti-intellectual culture, and that leads to non-thinking, but to taking sides based on values, based on attitudes, based on beliefs, based on one's parents, based on a feeling.
Still, it seems to me that taking sides based on sort of arguments, I'm very sympathetic with that. That was my introduction to this discipline, was we stand up, we debate, we figure out who won, and then that becomes closer to the truth. We arrive at a little bit better. So I'm not sure necessarily that contrarianism or having opposing opinions is some of the source of what we're actually struggling with now. I'm not sure that actually causes the either or type of thinking. So
I tried out debating with Douglas and nobody could figure out who won.
I think the fact that debate no longer occurs is the problem. No longer do we sit down with our fellow brother or our sister to discuss heartfelt issues. We have disparate binary opinions, and we allow ourselves to be in one camp or the other, not recognizing that when we move to the us or them philosophy that you mentioned, the divisions become more deeply ingrained than ever before. And thus we end up with a world where it's us versus them, Republicans versus Democrats, conservatives versus liberals, a patriot versus a part of the radical left. They tell me y'all have this CNN versus Fox, gun-toting, card-carrying NRA members versus everyone else, Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, as if all lives don't matter, and because all lives matter, black and brown and blue and yellow and purple lives matter. When there is a divide and we are equally separated and there is no conversation, we reach a point of stagnation. And when we reach the point of stagnation, this nation falls below its greatest potential.
I agree. And part of that, now I understand education was sketchy. In my time, I was lucky. I did have an education. However, because I was a girl, I didn't get to continue my education. I didn't get to go to college. I made sure that my children did, but no. But in that time, I've learned through our short visit here and the opportunity to read and see things, and I did see television. You should see it sometime before you go back. But this idea of something called civics, you must study it again. Do you know you only have 11 states that continue to teach civics in this country today? It's most important for us to know what you're talking about and what you're talking about and what you've alluded to and what you talk about, for us to be able to understand what it means to be a citizen. You have to be taught. Children are born without knowledge. You have to teach them. You have to train them. And we've stopped teaching civics.
Well, I never had much formal education. I love the uneducated.
That Mr. Trump said that.
But I don't mean the same thing.
Well, of course not. You're a good man.
I love the uneducated because they're naturally inquisitive. And they can learn to read on their own. Most of what I know from reading. But you're absolutely right about the foundation of this government, about the ideals set out in the Declaration of Independence that we've ignored. And we have to do something about that.
Restore civics. 5th grade, 7th grade, 10th grade, full year trainings.
So is this you have to be taught or you have to be carefully taught?
Teach them to think. We don't teach them what to think, we teach them how to think. That's the idea of an education. So I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I've always been slightly suspect of people who carefully teach, but that may just be my cultural background. I do think critical thinking is one of those things that has to be coupled with a willingness to express those thoughts. And I think that's, part and parcel here is you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you lack the confidence and the ability to step up and make your voice be heard, then that critical thinking isn't going to benefit the society that you are a part of. I think that's true.
I agree.
And that's one of the reasons why, the notion of an association devoted in part to the study and understanding of speaking seems like a very important kind of association to have.
I think it's important to recognize in this regard that my colleagues and friends from history come from a print age and from a print mindset, and that when you talk about education today, you're talking about a post-literate culture. And the terms have changed when we are grappling with the effects of an electronic media culture and now an internet and mobile internet culture as a distraction, among other things.
Well, I was grappling with the telegraph. And the telegraph was a wonderful new technology. I was able to get the news awfully fast.
Think of a telegraph in your hand, and that's the kind of flexibility that the students have today. I do think that there are some real habits of mind that are incurred by the electronic environment that a lot of our young people learn in today. I think the research has shown that there are some definite effects from that. But there's also a sense in which, this is a gateway to the greatest repository of knowledge in human history. This little thing, you can access more knowledge through this little thing than you can going out into this entire audience.
You mean I don't have to keep it all up here?
No.
Or in my father's library? There's more than my father's books in that?
Yes, there is. But there is a price for this. And I think, in previous discussions that we've had, we're also seeing, for example, a lot of our students are so enamored of the entertainment that they receive from this device, that they no longer value some of the institutions that we know of, like voting or like participation, service, and so forth. I think that's another issue that the children of today, we're struggling to make that meaningful to them.
I did see a study recently that it's been such a pleasure to be here. I don't get to read everything I'd like, but I did see a study that said that young people are participating more. They do community service. They may not know about voting, or they may say, oh, I don't keep up with the news every day. I have young people that I've run into here. They didn't say that. They read and pay attention and know what's going on in the world. But I understand there are young people that don't know those things. I think the students here must be what you were talking about, those communication majors. I think they know something.
If I might, I grew up in a time where it was illegal for someone like me to learn, to read or write. My story was told by other people because I myself didn't know how to put pen to paper, but that did not stop me from being a learned woman. I understood the power of knowledge. I understood that having the Word of God read to me was a powerful thing, and I didn't want anybody to interpret it for me. I wanted it simply put before me so that I could get the true meaning of it. Maybe the problem today is these young people, they have people interpreting things for them, and they don't take the time to have it placed before them in full truth. Truth is the thing that is missing. The information is put before us, and we merely receive it as it has been placed in our laps, never questioning whether or not it is authentic, it is good, whether or not it is truth. Technology has seemingly availed many doors for something that small could give us access to all knowledge. You would think that we would be a much more progressive society. Yet we have people that have the right to read, that have the right to knowledge, that have the right to vote, that have all of these rights placed before them because of the sacrifices of people like us, and they don't take advantage of it.
That bothers me greatly. Oh, yes.
How dare we have this access and not take full advantage of the access that we have?
Women weren't allowed to vote. I said it took 72 years to get the right to vote. It was I that said we needed to vote, and no one wanted us to talk about it. People said, no, you can't talk about that, Elizabeth. You cannot bring that out at the Constitution. You can't bring it up at the Constitution. Well, I brought it up at the convention. It was part of the resolutions. And only one newspaper liked what we said. Everyone else made fun of us. And most of the people that signed on to the resolutions afterwards wanted to take their names off because their friends were ridiculing them because of our event, because of the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848. Such a good day. You know, we planned that in just 10 days. It's kind of amazing. Yeah, that's what, but when you put people together, they can make a difference. And I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
But if we only speak because we have people at our backs in agreement, then what kind of world would that be? Sometimes you have to challenge the status quo for people, for the citizenry to be moved forward. It was not easy as a woman. It was not easy as a black woman at that, to stand before packed audiences proclaiming that what was going on in our world was right. sometimes you have to be the one willing to be bold and to say the hard thing, because when change is necessary, someone has to be the bold voice that calls forth those things as though they should be.
Well said.
So, how do you gain certainty of this truth which you speak of? I mean, I would evoke our friend Protagoras, who famously said, "Man is the measure," and by that, I think the interpretation was that Trump's truth is different from previous presidents' truth. And who is to judge if every man is a measure of truth between those two?
I think we need to shut up and stop talking so much. I think we need to spend more time listening to people. If the only truth that we seek is our own truth, then that's truth with a lowercase t. It is not the ultimate truth. Truth lies in the voices, often of the other. It often lies in the face of the marginalized beings. Truth is all around us, but it does not matter if you are not open and willing to seek the truth that is before you. If your eyes are closed to the evils all around, it doesn't matter if I speak my truth. If you refuse to hear the truth that I speak, then you will always be blind. And I have no part in congregating with blind people.
You bring up the issue of the other, and that takes us to another of our questions about what is it that makes a nation great. Our national treatment of the other has often been based on a fear of loss, of anxiety, a fear of economic loss, fear of change, of cultural differences, fear of the unknown. And so we see the other through a lot of different frames. And I'm wondering, we move from religious tolerance to Black Lives Matter to immigration policy. Right now, we have a caravan of rapists and murderers and terrorists heading toward our border. And this is how we portray the immigrant. So I'm wondering, what kind of lessons or issues do you bring from the past about how a nation provides, develops, gains respect for the other?
You have to fight. That's what we did. Women were not part of anything. We had no vote. We had no right. We became the extension of our husbands, fathers, sons, brothers. We had no standing.
But you also have to experience the other. One of the most embarrassing things I ever said, in 1858, I said there's a physical difference between the races, which will forever forbid them from living together under terms of equality.
You said that.
And if so, I said, one race must be superior and the other inferior. And I, as much as any man, am in favor of the white race being assigned the superior position. That's not right. It helped me politically. I got votes in the area where I said it. But I didn't know on what basis I said that. I didn't experience the other. I like to think I grew from that. I did say it was a sign, not inherent. And in that last speech I ever gave, the one that Mr. Booth didn't like very much, I said that at least some blacks should enjoy the right to vote. And I think if I could have followed that progression from then until now, I would never say what I said back in 1858 because I'd have experience with the other. And that's part of how we get the truth, is we experience it.
That's why I like you. And that's why I said I appreciate you, for you are the best president who has ever taken seat. I said that in 1864, and I believe it today.
Well, thank you, Sojourner.
When I first wrote about the global village and the idea that electronic and electric media would return us to a sense of tribalism, and my student Walter Ong wrote about this in terms of what he called secondary orality. I never, in my work, meant to pass judgment and be evaluative of the changes that I was observing and trying to analyze. But I will admit that I did think that this might be a good thing, that this might bring us together, that returning to the idea of a world where we could all see one another and talk to one another and share one another through this extension of ourselves that is a great central nervous system. It's interesting that at the time I came up with that is the beginning of what in the academy we call the movement of cultural studies and critical cultural studies. That we would make the world, despite the flat earthers, we would make the world flat. We would invite everyone equally to the table to sit together and talk to one another. The thing that I see, the failure of cultural studies is that we don't all sit at the same table. We have tables in different rooms, and we all go and share in our special interests. And that hope in the face of now and how these electronic technologies have mutated, I fear that I was wrong in what I hoped for.
Is it even possible, though, for us all to be at the same table? I mean, it seems like we oftentimes are just talking completely different languages, and we have different interests. So how, as scholars, can we come together at the same table?
Empathy. To realize that we're all human, that there's something to learn from each of us. Every life experience is something different. I'm not sure.
There is a pastor today who said something incredibly profound. He said, "Distance creates disdain. Disdain turns into disparagement, and disparagement turns into disconnection." We have to come together at the same table, whether we speak different languages or not. Because when we are at the table, we realize that our languages may be different, but our humanity is not. We have forgotten the central thing that links us is our humanity. It is not our national affiliation. It is not our religion, though I love the God I preach. It is the fact that we are all humans on this earth, whether we speak the same language, whether we are learned or not, whether we have the same amount of privilege or not. We are all human, and somehow, time and again, we continually seem to forget that little factor. And because we forget that, we can, the television thing, you should watch it, it's interesting. We can put people in cages, children in cages, and not see anything wrong with that. What most people fail to forget about me is that in the 1800s, I was bold enough to say that it was wrong to sell my child into the South in slavery, and I sued to have my child brought back to me. In the 1800s, as a former slave, as a black person, and as a woman. But I knew as a human, it was my right to have my baby with me. We forget that there are other people who may not have what we have, who may not look like us, who may not have the same opportunities that we have. But at the end of the day, they are human, just like you and me.
I agree.
You know, Sojourner, I've been reading a little bit about some of the presidents that came after me. And the ones, it seems, the ones that are regarded as the greatest among them are precisely the ones who struck just this theme, who sought to transcend our differences with appeals to our common humanity and to things that unite us. And for a time, those always were persuasive. And yet, almost every time, there was afterwards a reaction that set in. And we took steps backward, offsetting the ones we had taken forward, because we somehow forgot that we're not going to get to that common humanity in a day, to everybody recognizing it. But eventually, if we continue to pursue that line, we'll get there.
Well, and there's a new study. I got to read some more. Harvard Business School. They looked at international...
What's a business school?
You don't want to know.
Especially from their point of view, no. But they looked at international migration from 1960 to 2010, and they found that the GDP growth was good. It was good for the economy, that it brought large benefits to the economy, and the bottom line results were that it increased a range of skills and ideas and innovative solutions for the country. So what you're saying is very important, and I think I said it first, humanity. It's what we have to strive for, and that idea of empathy is everything. If you don't understand that you're a human being, I'm a human being, together we can learn about each other.
How can we ask for the poor, huddled masses and then turn them away when they come? Have we not lost our humanity when we do that?
Oh, indeed. And that's that man in the White House. He lied. Oh, and I don't remember. What was the number? They just said it in the news. Is 5,000 lies documented? Was it in his 2 years in office? Is not quite 2 years in office. Is that true? Maybe I got the number wrong. That's a lot of lies. That's more than 2 a day.
Part of the issue for me is it comes back to demagoguery, which is to say that one of the reasons why we have more divisiveness is that it becomes a tool by which power is attained. Yes. Perhaps most recently, prior to the recent elections, was the absolute constant fear appeals which were presented by politicians, but were also amplified by the media in their role as well. So it seems to me that at least part of the treatment of the other is not the citizen's ability to empathize, but the politicians and the people in power's ability to manipulate the divisions such that we attain more power.
But what is it about the citizens that makes them susceptible to that?
Lack of training in civics.
Well, I would add, and you anticipated my word when we say, to what extent does media enable demagoguery? You talked about amplifying it. And so Hitler can come to power in an age of radio where his voice carries, and we listen to that voice and what he urges. And we step away from the word on the page, which sets us to thinking in a different frame of mind. And now we have an array of media where I have talked about what is invisible in our media messages, which is the media themselves. But yet now we have another level of invisibility, which is this underlying infrastructure, this architecture, which allows people to use media for nefarious purposes that we can never see on the surface.
Media has amplified the problem, but polarization existed before media and before
even in my day.
Yes. For some reason, we keep falling back into the idea, we keep allowing fear to drive us.
Bob Woodward has a new book on fear. Have you seen it? Have you seen it yet? Before we go back, we must read it together.
Will do.
Yes. Mm.
But fear, and not just fear, it's the idea, it's something called complementary projection. The idea that I fear you, so you must be dangerous. How asinine is it to figure that you are someone that must be relegated to the status of other because I don't know you?
Didn't we have a president who said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself?
That was FDR, yes.
You presidents.
But if people are susceptible to it, it works. It's money in the bank. It's votes in the ballot box. So, I mean, how do we move out of this or move towards something that gets us past a system that allows fear to wag the dog, that allows the tail to manipulate what's happening in our nation and the direction that we're going? How do we break out?
I thought that was education.
I'd agree.
And not only education, it meant training about being a citizen and knowing that you have to know what's going on in your world every day. You must read a newspaper. It was easy when it was just a newspaper, but now there's so much news. And I can understand how your student may have a problem knowing how to choose, because they use this thing and they get little pings all day, and they may or may not look at it. They may or may not read it. But the point is, they have access to information, but they're not choosing what they're reading. It's choosing them. Does that seem like a point?
It seems like an excellent point about the medium and the massage that the students get.
That's yours.
Yes, if the sources of your news and your information and your learning are changed by the medium through which you access these things, then it is incumbent upon us to provide a media education. I am not a fan of the term media literacy. As a student of mine once said, in the face of the names of courses like reading the film, who watches a book, right? Literacy is about a print literate mindset and print literacy only, the word. We must teach students to be able to analyze and understand how the media of their time and their world impact what they can know, impact the truth.
And now you're back to critical thinking, what you said. So what kind of training happens today for critical thinking for our young people?
Different kinds. Logic. Some learn argumentation. Some do debate. But there's critical thinking in a variety of disciplines.
Well, as I understand it, when your discipline was founded in the modern era, it was founded on the belief that training people to speak effectively was an important ingredient of citizenship.
But that was based on thinking.
Do people still think that?
Well, the number one fear that most people have is of actually standing up and speaking in public. So I'm not sure that they all follow that dictum very strongly. But, you know, I do think that there's a gap that's caused by the media environment, and that gap has to do with their willingness to stand forward. You mentioned that a lot of young people are getting actively involved, and I think that is true. We're seeing examples like the Parkland students after the shooting. We have a problem with mass shootings in this country now.
I saw that there was one since we've been here.
Yes, there was. But, you know, so some students are particularly articulate. It's very interesting to me that the county that Parkland High School was in was actually one that mandates debate. It requires debate through the levels of the school. And
I read that too.
one of the reasons they were accused of being paid actors was because they were so articulate. And they, you know, people couldn't believe that a student could speak this well. So I know that we do get some of our students to speak well. My concern is that it's so easy with this kind of a technology to just like, oh, I like that. And that's it. That's the extent of my involvement. So in a way, distance
What you said.
brings us to disconnection, even though we're all connected.
And that is one of the challenges of, what do you call it, social media. That is one of the challenges that exists.
I wondered what that term meant.
I think she's hit upon it.
One of the great things about this technology, and these students at Parkland, they're phenomenal. They created hashtag, that's cool, a hashtag never again movement. They are incredibly powerful in that they invited us to have a national dialogue, a national conversation, which means, once again, we're talking about coming to the table and how important it is to sit around the table. But I will suggest to you that those young kids from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School represent a unique play on using social media to advocate for change, because they knew each other before. Yes, it is the ability to speak eloquently. And while I may not have been as eloquent as Frederick Douglass, the idea...
You're doing pretty well, Sojourner.
Yes, you are.
The idea of being able to stand up and speak your mind becomes incredibly important. The difference between these kids, though, is that they had relationship. They remind me of the types of relationships that existed between the people who would do the sit-ins in the 1960s. They did not have access to all this newfangled technology, but they had connection and they had relationship. And they would sit in and they would march and they would protest and they would do all of these things, lock arm in arm, even when they were being attacked by dogs. So yes, we have more connection in forms of technology, but we don't always have the connection that comes from sitting together at a table and eating together.
So very important.
All media have their strengths and weaknesses. They're a Faustian bargain. They giveth, they taketh away. They can be used wisely. They can be used wrongly. How do we teach people to, in the face of these technologies and with these technologies, use them well, use them to achieve these purposes, use them to join together, or use them in a way where they know it's time to put them away, to be together?
That's where your communication comes in. Now you teach, again, how to think, not what to think, how to think. That thinking process is so very important. I'm so pleased. You have to ask the questions. You mentioned the word status quo. Status quo is so very important. It has to be challenged if someone is in pain. I was in pain, not being recognized to have a good intellect and have the opportunity to make something happen besides have 7 children. It was very important to be able to have the opportunity to say, I matter. That was the point of the Seneca Falls Convention. Women mattered. You said that earlier about Black lives matter and blue lives matter and yellow lives matter. Well, I know all lives matter, but women's lives matter too. And what we think matters. And to have the opportunity, the ability to speak, that takes training. And they didn't want women to have education, and they did not want us to go to college. What does that do to who we're supposed to be today? How do you function today without education? You don't. What happens when you drop out of school? Your life changes. You have no future.
But I will suggest that while it is wonderful for those who have access, there are some who have wisdom beyond measure, like myself,
Yes.
who did not have
Indeed.
the benefit
Oh,
of an
of course,
education.
of course.
But for those who have the opportunity and the access, by all means, take advantage of it.
I agree.
By
I
all
agree.
means.
I never had the opportunity. I wish I had.
You did okay.
Well, thank you.
If the technology, though, has certain tendencies built within it, affordances or whatever you want to call it, then even the most critical thinking mind is still going to fall into those affordances in some way. So, for example, we have a social media platform where we like our friends and we unfriend those that we don't like. And the inevitable result of that is the society in which I am not experiencing the other. I am experiencing basically reproductions of my own value system. And so how does this echo chamber of a social media system, how does that allow us or afford us the ability to move past our divisions? It seems a really fundamental issue about the evolution, this latest evolution of technology, is its tendencies are to actually isolate us among those people that we already agree with.
Let me start my answer, and I'm answering start because you're looking at me. Let me start my answer by suggesting that I have often been misinterpreted as a technological determinist, and that I do not believe that technologies, that media technologies have a moral bent built into them, that they present themselves to us with what they can do and the ways in which we can use them, and we decide. Now, they do perhaps present themselves in ways where that decision becomes an easy one. It becomes an automatic one. It becomes the one toward which we gravitate. But that is a decision that we make as individuals, and of course individuals living in a social and cultural sphere where we are influenced by how everyone else uses it, by how power uses it. Right? Television does not have to be what it became in the United States. When the United States started out in 1922 devising a commercial system of broadcasting with a commercial imperative. At the same time in Western Europe, they developed a social model. So please don't misunderstand me.